This is the Solid Signal podcast for the week of June 5th, 2023. The subject this week is local channels and RVs, as in, are you getting your local channels in your RV? That's the real question. And in order to really understand it, you have to look back on a lot of different things, and you have to understand why even your average Solid Signal customer would be interested. Let's start with the kind of history. TV broadcasting has always been focused on a single location. Now, it doesn't mean that you couldn't have a TV in a recreational vehicle in 1955, but I think it would have been pretty hard. TVs weren't terribly reliable, they were big and clunky and just not something you would do. I have to say, if I had to guess, although I don't have as much data as I wish I did, that putting a TV in your RV probably didn't happen that much before the 1980s and 1990s. At that point, you were seeing a drop in the price of televisions and also an increase in the quality, so that in both cases, you're going to see that putting a TV in there just made a little bit more sense. Now, why is this little bit of history important? Because in order to understand why it's hard to get local channels in your RV, you need to understand why nobody really thought about it. And if you didn't have this whole thing happen until the 1980s, and television broadcasting has been around since the late 1940s, that's a whole bunch of time when laws were made thinking about the idea of serving people who are essentially going to be in their homes, or to some extent businesses. Now, when TV broadcasting first came out, it was the only form of video entertainment. Of course, today we have the internet and we have cable and satellite and all that stuff. But if you look at the OG, it was always television broadcasting. And television broadcasting was done, for the most part, by network affiliates. This was a carryover from the radio days when you had these individual station owners who were affiliated with a network, which, for example, CBS, ABC, NBC, that sort of thing. And they would get some national programming in addition to having some local programming during the day. But when you had these stations, which were incredibly expensive to operate, station owners were nervous, especially when you started to see cable television becoming possible in the 1960s and 1970s. If you were in a smaller market, say, for example, let's just say Cincinnati, a relatively small market, still pretty big city, but not as big as like New York or Los Angeles. You want to make sure you're protected. You want to make sure that the people who watch your channel are not given the option to watch a channel out of New York, because the channel out of New York has got a lot more people. That means the advertising is going to look better. The news stations are going to look better. Everything is going to look better. And so you don't have a chance of competing in your smaller market station. In order to make sure that these smaller cities had the chance to flourish, the FCC gave them exclusivity, which meant that it was literally illegal for a signal from another market to go into these markets. And the way they did that was by saying you couldn't broadcast in such a way that you could exceed the boundaries of your market. You couldn't just put up, a 1,000,000-watt receiver and go twice as far and stomp all over smaller markets. And think about areas. Here's a perfect example, something like New York City and Hartford. Hartford would never have a chance of surviving against New York City if New York City stations were allowed to blast their signal so powerful that it would be gotten very easily in Hartford. They granted this kind of exclusivity so that wouldn't happen. Now, flash forward quite a few years till the turn of the 21st century, a term that will never not seem weird to me. And you had satellite companies, DirecTV and Dish, that were lobbying Congress to be able to offer local channels. And they couldn't offer local channels for a very simple and yet kind of stupid reason. Remember, the law said that you couldn't broadcast outside your local area. And with satellites being outside the local area, broadcasters couldn't send a signal up to them, so it couldn't get back down to satellite customers. And the law was very clear in that. And so you needed to change the law so that for the purpose of receiving local channels in a local area, it was okay to broadcast outside the local area. But still, it was a very limited use case. And also, both DirecTV and Dish had to provide two things in order to make that work. The first was the technology to make sure that satellite signals weren't going to be received in areas that they shouldn't be. And that came down to using spot beams and conditional access. In other words, the access cards that people get with their receivers. And the second was to make sure that whenever possible, that exclusivity could be preserved. So they did this, and they made it relatively hard for people to change markets from place to place unless they had the support of a DirecTV dealer, and certain waivers were given. And that's basically where we went for about 10, 15, almost 20 years. Well, here we are in the middle of the 2020s with a problem. You see, broadcast television has evolved so that it's now more or less impossible to get TV using a TV antenna while the RV is moving. This is an unfortunate side effect of the digital TV transition of 2009. If we ever see the next generation of digital television, which may or may not ever happen, that problem will go away. However, that's still something we have no idea of when it's going to happen. So you're in an RV and you can't really watch live TV from an antenna because you're moving. And you can't really watch it from your satellite because you're outside the local area. So what can you do? DirecTV and Dish have gone two really different directions here. DirecTV is always the more or less conservative one, the one that just doesn't try to skirt around the rules. And they say, well, you can change your local address essentially twice a year. More than that, forget about it. And if you're changing your local address, you have to be somewhere where you can receive mail at that address. It can't just be like an RV park or something like that. And some RV customers use that. And some RV customers put up antennas that they only use while the RV is parked. That's perfectly fine. Dish goes about it a different way with their Dish Outdoors plan. Now, the Dish Outdoors plan is a very specific plan. And what it does is it's just designed for your RV. There's only a certain number of things you can put on top of it. You can't just like have 2 hoppers attached to it and 10 clients and stuff like that. It's only designed for RVs. And what you can do is change your local area using the Dish Outdoors app. And it lets you do this with some regularity, which is nice. I'll say that. But the Dish Outdoors plans tend to be pay month to month, and they do tend to be more expensive. So if you want that capability, it's kind of out there, but you do end up paying more for it. There is a third option, of course, and it's streaming. Now, you can stream the channel straight from its own website, or you can use, sometimes you'll find like, you can use the Pluto app to get a lot of news channels all across the country, and those aren't really worry about exclusivity since they're streaming and not broadcasting, so you can get them from anywhere in the country. Or you can use the provider apps to stream live television. For example, you can watch your local CBS affiliate on the Paramount Plus app if you're just looking for network channels. But streaming in an RV isn't always the best solution. It's not always the best experience because you're just looking at a tiny little screen instead of sharing everything on the television screen that you're used to. You can use streaming when it comes to putting stuff on a TV, but what you need to have is Wi-Fi. Tethering to your phone just doesn't really work. There's 2 reasons. First of all, tethering plans aren't necessarily very generous. You may use up that entire tethering allowance in one day. Second of all, your phone isn't really good as far as tethering. It's got to be pretty darn close to the thing that it's serving, and that really isn't a great solution when you're talking about something that's built into the RV. No, you really want a separate device like a Gotspot or SimTel from GotW3. These are wireless routers that have their own dedicated plans. Makes it easy for you to get all the data that you need and provide strong Wi-Fi that you can use for streaming or even working from the RV. Because let's be honest, nobody really wants to be tied down to the house or the office when they could be out enjoying the rest of America. You see, local channels and RVs are such a confusing thing. And I know that too, which is why I'm going to urge you not to just listen to the rest of this podcast, not to just leave a comment wherever you get this one, to like and subscribe like I always do, but I'm going to ask you to call the experts at Signal Connect. We've got more experience with this stuff than anybody else. And what you want to do is call 888-233-7563 during East Coast business hours. And you're going to get an expert. You're going to get somebody in our Michigan offices who really knows what they're talking about. Who's going to be able to lay out all the options specifically to you and for you and help you get exactly what you want out of that satellite system. Because when it comes right down to it, satellite TV is still really a better option for RVs than, for example, Starlink or something like that, which ends up being more expensive. And there are issues, such as having to trade out your equipment every year or so, as historically that's what we're looking at, and prices being pretty high for what you get. You don't necessarily get the same speed of internet that you would get from home, and yet you pay quite a bit more. So call us at Signal Connect and we'll explain how satellite TV really is such a great value. Until then, I ask you all one small thing, and that's have a great week, and I'll talk to you again soon.